My name is Lisa Chase, and I'm a professor at University of Vermont Extension and director of the Vermont Tourism Research Center. Today, we are discussing indigenous and tribal perspectives on agritourism. This virtual gathering today is the third in a series of monthly gatherings that will take us through spring and most of the way to when the International Workshop on Agritourism will take place in Vermont in August of 2022, in person, we are hoping. I want to mention that a major sponsor for the conference and also for these virtual gatherings is Yonder, a new booking site that promotes farm stays and other nature-rich guest experiences. Founded and advised by farmers and ranchers, Yonder highlights stewards or hosts that have a connection to their local community, practice environmental responsibility, and exhibit hospitality that's reflective of this commitment. Through the Yonder site and app, guests can discover and book overnight stays and activities at farms in the US and pretty soon in Europe as well. That's coming in early 2021, I believe. Yonder started in the US, but is now expanding around the world. And they're an important partner for the International Agritourism Network that was launched at the first World Congress on Agritourism held in Italy, in Bolzano, Italy, in 2018, and was organized by UREC Research. Through this agritourism gathering today, we're continuing to build this network, and we'll continue to have these virtual gatherings and try to figure out other ways to connect online until we're able to meet in person again at the conference that will take place in Vermont in August of 2021. In just a moment, we're going to dive into today's discussion on indigenous and tribal perspectives on agritourism. But first, I want to get a sense of who is here with us today. So I'm going to launch a poll. And you should see on your screen some questions. Apologies to those of you who have telephoned in. For those of you who have connected on your computer screens or phones, you should be able to see some questions asking you to describe yourself, whether you're a farmer rancher, service provider, nonprofit, government agency, or more. And while I'm giving you a moment to fill that out, I do want to, and notice, scroll down, there's two questions. The first one is describe yourself, and you can check all that apply. The second question is, do you identify with any indigenous cultural groups or have tribal affiliations? So please take another minute or two to click the boxes and submit your answers. And while we're doing that, I want to mention we had about, let's see, about 374 people registered at last count this morning, and it looks like we have 144 people joining us today. And I was able to see on the registration list that we had people coming in from 31 different countries, all over the globe, including some of you who probably should be asleep right now. I'm going to end the polling and share the results. So you should be able to see on your screen that, let's see, we're about a quarter researchers, about 15% farmers and ranchers, another quarter service providers, extensions. Not far behind, we've got nonprofit, government agency, and tourism professionals. Let's see, in terms of tribal affiliation, we've got about 12% yes, and the vast majority are no. So we are really lucky today to be able to hear from folks who are in this space and can help us, whether we have a tribal affiliation or not, can help us understand how to connect and support agritourism, working with indigenous communities and tribal nations. I do want to right now mention that we invite you. One of my big complaints about Zoom webinar is that we can't see all of each other. And it's just not the same as being in a room where we could look out at all these different faces from different countries, different places, different perspectives. We lose that with Zoom webinar. So I want to invite you all now to type into the chat and say hi from wherever you are. Feel free to share your name, your business, your affiliation if you like, or just share your country that you're from. And while you're doing that, I'm going to turn it over to our moderator, Trevor Lane, who is a state specialist in community and economic development for Washington State University Extension, where he is working closely with tribal and rural communities to share agritourism community narratives through the use of video storytelling. His work supports small farms and ranches, small business ecosystems, and community resilience programs. He is also on the planning committee for the International Workshop on Agritourism. Trevor, thank you so much for moderating the discussion today.
You bet, Lisa. Thank you so much for having me. Good morning, everybody. Today, we're going to be celebrating sovereignty and demonstrating the uniqueness of all the tribes. This conversation seeks to broaden understanding of indigenous-led agritourism initiatives with a focus on the unity of human and ecological communities. Presentations will explore the best practices for integrating agro-biodiversity conservation in tribal communities, how culture, tradition, and history blends through the Three Sisters story, and how ancient connections apply to contemporary travel company design and marketing. And today we've got with us three very amazing speakers. We've got Sherry Rupert, who is the CEO of the American Indian Alaska Native Tourism Association, Stephen Taranto, who is the director, and he's program director and owner of La Paz on Foot in Bolivia. And we've got Rony Lee, who is the founder of Mesoamerican Permaculture Institute in Guatemala. On that note, and in that order, I would like to have our first speaker, Sherry, share her screen, and I turn it over to her for a wonderful discussion.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Trevor, for that introduction. I appreciate that. I am from the state of Nevada here in the United States. I am Washoe and Paiute. I am the CEO for the American Indian Alaska Native Tourism Association. I've been on the job for about a year and a half now, but have been participating on the board of directors for the 10 years prior to that. So again, very happy to be here with you this morning to talk about agritourism and about AIANTA's. I'm trying to get it to forward how we're working in agritourism through our organization. So AIANTA's mission is to define, introduce, grow, and sustain American Indian, Alaska Native, and Native Hawaiian tourism that honors traditions and values. For nearly 2 decades, the American Indian Alaska Native Tourism Association has served as the national center for providing tourism and recreational travel, technical assistance, training, and capacity building to American Indian nations. We are a 501c3 national nonprofit association of Native American tribes and tribal businesses, and we were incorporated in 2002 to advance Indian country tourism. So a little bit about what we do. We work with the country's 574 federally recognized tribes, the state recognized tribes, and Native Hawaiians. We are the only organization specifically dedicated to advancing Indian country tourism across the U.S., and we serve as the voice and resource for tribes and tribal organizations engaged in cultural tourism. We help tribes develop, sustain, and grow tourism destinations through our technical assistance and training programs and providing educational resources. So a little bit about the tribes here in the U.S. They have 59 million acres of land in Indian country that are engaged in food and agriculture. Most of the value of those products leave tribal lands and communities and don't return. 20 million of the 26 million acres in Arizona involved in food and agriculture are under direct tribal control. The largest contiguous farm in the US is the Navajo agricultural products industry, and top 10 farms in South Dakota, Arizona, New Mexico, Oregon, Washington, California, and Idaho are tribal farms. So with more than 80% of native farmers living on their farm or ranch and are reporting farming and ranching as their primary occupation, an increasing number of producers are looking to grow their revenue by diversifying their product offerings. So a little bit about how AIANTA is working in tribal agritourism. We recently just published the case studies in tribal agritourism. So it's a collection of case studies and throughout the country. Let's see the listing here. So case studies in tribal agritourism is a groundbreaking new handbook by AIANTA, developed for ranchers, farmers, and other native food producers interested in sharing culture, heritage, and traditional food systems by expanding or developing agritourism enterprises. The stories within offer diverse examples of successful tribal agritourism business models from the Choctaw Nation of Oklahoma, the Yokadihi-Wintun Nation of California, Icy Strait Point, the Hunaclinket in Alaska, the Santa Ana Pueblo in New Mexico, and the Big Apple Fest of the Oneida Nation of Wisconsin, and the Iroquois White Corn Project of the Seneca Nation of Indians in New York. These aren't meant to be templates, but rather are intended to serve as a source of inspiration for tribal farmers, ranchers, and producers. We've also grown our listings on nativeamerica.travel. Nativeamerica.travel is our consumer-facing website, and we encourage all of the tribes in the nation to provide their content. So we're, again, growing that list of agritourism offerings across the country. We also offer a tribal agritourism resource page on our aianta.org website. So you can see the website here, the web page for agritourism. So it's got a lot of great information there for you, along with the case studies, this manual that you see here. You can download it from our website. Agritourism presentation and networking break at the 2020 American Indian Tourism Conference. We just had our conference mid-September. It was our first virtual conference. We had over 800 in attendance, and Lisa, I think you were an attendee as well. But it was a great opportunity to really bring light to the importance of agritourism in our tribal communities and to showcase our new manual. We also have some upcoming agritourism webinars, which I'm going to mention here in a minute. There they are. So we have a webinar series on agritourism coming up. The next one is next week on Tuesday, November 24th, building a native agritourism ecosystem. Oh, I have it there twice, sorry. And then another one on December 8th, the Oneida Big Apple Fest, developing an agritourism festival. And I know there's another one as well, and that is on the agritourism resource page that I mentioned in the prior slide. So again, agritourism is an important part of tourism that we're really interested in growing. We're seeing a huge push for agritourism within our tribes. A lot of it stems from really wanting to get back to the traditional foods for their families and for other tribal members. And with that comes comes other opportunities, which I'm sure we're going to talk about today. So thank you.
Thank you, Sherry. And next up on our list, we have Stephen Taranto. As I said, he is the owner and program director of La Paz on Foot in Bolivia. Stephen, on that note, take it away, my friend.
Thank you very much, Trevor. And first of all, I would just like to thank the organizers of this event for inviting me to be here today. I would just like to say from the start that I do not identify as indigenous. However, I have been working for pretty much my entire professional life with indigenous communities. And the case study I'm going to share to you today, while in no way do I pretend to speak for the community and the people who I work with, I do feel that the past 15 years of very deep, sustained work with the community puts me in a position to share some of the experiences that we've had together as we develop an agritourism project in this community that you'll hear about now. So I'm going to share my screen here and hope for the best. So here in the picture, you can see the group of community members that I've been working with since 2008. This is a community of AIANTA, indigenous peoples, and I've put a greeting there, Kamisaki, which means it's just hello in Aymara. And I would just like to mention that working in Bolivia on tourism, whether it's agritourism or any other kind of tourism, may be a little bit different than working in a lot of other places because, for example, the Aymara population in Bolivia is well over 1 million. So they are a very large, very strong, very important politically and economically. And so that brings, you know, some interesting ways of working because as Trevor and Lisa mentioned, I am the co-owner of a responsible tourism company, and pretty much everybody that we work with, including many of our employees, identify as indigenous. So we have really been in a very wonderful and unique position to work with many indigenous communities. And today I'll just be sharing you some work that we've been doing in one particular community. The community is named Santiago de Okola. And if I can ask you to just look at the map of Bolivia, in the upper right-hand corner of the map, you can see that the community is located along the western frontier and right on, as you can see in the larger map, on Lake Titicaca. And Lake Titicaca is a lake that's shared between Bolivia and Peru. There are about 350 residents, mostly older, because there are massive waves of migration of young people from rural areas to urban areas. Everybody is bilingual, and we're about 3.5 hours from La Paz, the capital, the de facto capital of Bolivia. And as you can see on the map here, the community is about 1.5 hours by ferry. My notes there are wrong, which is significant because the Island of the Sun is probably the most important tourist destination in the country. And in this community, you have two systems of governance. One is internal and traditional, and then the other would be the state of Bolivia, the plurinational state of Bolivia. And the reason why we worked in this community, and this is very important, is because through a methodology that's being used in Bolivia and Peru and other areas that have very important collections, you could say, of agro-biodiversity, of different kinds of corn, different kinds of potatoes, this community had been identified as a community that harbored an extremely high diversity of native Andean crops, all of which are under pressure of extinction by either older farmers dying and not being able to pass on their knowledge, or changing diets that no longer require or demand these varieties, and also climate change, which is changing the conditions for producing many of these crops as the onset time of rainfall changes, for example. And this project came about through internationally funded program that was granted to a local NGO called the ProIMPA Foundation in Bolivia. And the goal of the project, which I think I have on my next slide, I hope, was to see if it would be possible, it was a pilot project on agritourism, to see if tourism could work to help conserve some of these products through a wide range of activities, such as, you know, gastronomy, walking tours, visiting parcels, and other kinds of educational activities. And as you can see from my slide here, there really were 4 goals. Conserve the agro-biodiversity, slow migration, generate income, and conserve Aymara cuisine and agriculture, or culture, if you will. And the initial project, we looked at 4 different communities, and Santiago de Okola was chosen because, number 1, and most importantly, the community wanted the project. They were very interested. As I mentioned before, they harbor high levels of Andean crop varieties. The community is close to the capital city and a high visit destination. And not only was agro-biodiversity there as a potential attraction, but there were many other attractions that could make it interesting for tourists. We did at the very beginning, we were working with surveys of crop varieties that each family, we went family by family of the 12 families that were participating in the project. And as you can see here from this photo, it's just obviously a very stunning landscape. And this is what made it seem like a place that we could give this a try. And in the background, you can see a rock formation that has like the head of a dragon, and that's known locally as the sleeping dragon, and has great cultural, spiritual, and archaeological significance, as well as being a part of a living community. And because we don't have a lot of time, and you can ask me questions later, I'm just going to go straight to the results here. Of course, I have many more things to share after 15 years of work, but this is really one of the most significant outcomes that I'd like to share, especially as many of you consider agritourism in your communities and the kinds of outcomes that you might have from it. And I'm not going to go into a complicated statistical interpretation here, but what this slide shows, and what I really hope we can all focus on here, we did the survey. Well, let me back up. Of those objectives or goals of the project that I mentioned, raising income was one of them. I'm not going to look at that here. We don't have trustable data, but we do know that incomes increased over these 12 years. And if anybody wants to talk about that at another moment, I'm happy to. But what this chart shows is that if you look at 2008, of the 12 families that we worked with, you can see of 6 different Andean crops, which are listed on the right-hand side of the chart. We found out how many varieties of each of those each family had. And if you look at 2020, you see a dramatic change. What this is showing is that those 12 families, each of which were growing particular varieties of Andean crops, shared those crops with all of the other families in the project. And what this creates is a kind of on-site conservation gardens where we have dozens and dozens of at-risk Andean crops being grown out and used not only for consumption in families as a kind of food security, but also used for touristic activities. And this was just the kind of outcome that we were hoping for. And these results will be published soon in a journal. I'll be happy to get that to UVM for sharing with all of you. Sadly, in 2020, we know what happened. The pandemic hit. And of course, now projects such as this are at great risk, because what did drive this important shift here and this important diversification was the tourism project. So I think I'm going to stop there. As I said, I have much more to share, but I'll be happy to take your questions and reach out to you in other ways outside of the talk. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. That was very interesting. I look forward to the Q&A session as we dive in more with Sherry and you and here in a little bit. But before we do, I want to introduce our last and final speaker, Rony Lee, and have him, he's the founder of the Mesoamerican Permaculture Institute, and have him talk a little bit about his operations and what he's doing. You're on mute, buddy.
Okay, hello everyone.
We can hear you now.
Yeah, no, I don't know what happened now.
Oh, we can't see you. Can you put your video back on?
Yeah, I was trying to do that, but I don't know what happened. Start video, but it doesn't give, it says unable to start the video.
Huh.
Yeah, let's see if I can get a, yeah, doesn't allow me, it says no. I was there, okay, let's see, the host asks you to start your video, start my video, okay. Now I am there. Okay, hello everyone. I am Ronaldo Lek Ajcot, or Rony. I'm Maya Cachiquel from Guatemala. And today I'm going to share with you why did we choose to do agrotourism. And sorry that I don't have a presentation for you, so you just have to use your imagination. Yeah, so yes, Guatemala, after Bolivia, is one of the countries that has the most indigenous people. So the majority of the population is indigenous. And in Central America, Guatemala is one of the most tourist places as well. And so I come from a part of the country that is called Lake Atitlan, probably the second biggest tourist place in the country. But at the same time, also Lake Atitlan is one of a part of the country that has the most malnutrition, and therefore is also one of the poorest part of the country. And that's what drove us to start working in our area, is because of the high levels of malnutrition. So our work started to first to look for the best native foods that has the most nutrients. And it happens that Mesoamerica has some like the most superfoods in the planet. Foods such as the amaranth, chia, and chocolate, and chaya, just to mention some. So yes, also Guatemala is part of what is called Mesoamerica, and that it includes basically the whole Mayan area, which is not just Guatemala, but it's from southern Mexico, Belize, Honduras, and El Salvador. And So that's also one of the most diverse places in the planet. In terms of biodiversity, plant biodiversity, but as well as cultural biodiversity. So in Guatemala, we have 22 Mayan languages, plus Xinca, Garifuna, and Spanish. So it's like a very diverse cultural place, as well as in the plant diversity. So there was no reason why would be suffering from malnourishment. So our goal with the Mesoamerican Permaculture Institute was to rescue all these superfoods, ancient foods, and try to bring it back. So our first projects center around the implementing community seed banks. And so we started the whole movement of community seed banks, which is something really new. Before, every family had their seeds, gathered their seeds, and now we're losing all of that. So there was need to create a community seed banks. So that kind of initiated the seed bank network in the country. And now we have 4 seed banks. Our goal was to establish 1 seed bank in each bioregion of the country. And some say 7, some say that is more, but the idea was to have 1 in each bio. But we are still only in 4 bioregions, and that is after 20 years of work. So that's in terms of the origins of our work was with seed, focus on seeds, and then we focus on training farmers in ecological ways, in the permaculture design, and also as well as ancestral knowledge of how to do agriculture. So that's what we've been doing with the Mesoamerican Permaculture Institute in the last 20 years. But we saw that tourism was a big part in our area, in that most of the benefits of that tourism wasn't going into the communities. And one of the reasons is that most of the business and most of the infrastructure developed for tourism were owned by non-locals. So many foreigners were the ones who basically control all the tourism in our area. So that's why it was the community wasn't benefiting it. But also there were many other obstacles for tourism, for the community to do tourism, and one of them is the infrastructure, and also people the communities don't have that a culture for services, of to serve outsiders and do the tourism. So that was a other main obstacle for the communities, and so we decided to do tourism that was also that would benefit not only economically to our communities, but also culturally. Tourism that would come in value our traditions and our knowledge and our ways. So that's how we came to decide to do tourism, was that we had so much to offer, in that the whole tourism was going to be centered around agriculture. In agriculture, because that was the heart of our culture. That's what their people were all about. It was all about being land-based in agriculture-based. So that's why I said, okay, this is what we wanna present, is what we're about. We don't wanna create something that we are not. And then we started to open a program where also we were selective of what tourism was going to come. And at the beginning, we decided that we were going to focus on education too, and not so much of entertainment. So we started to work with universities or groups, organized tourist groups that were more based on learning rather than just having a good time. And so then our program was based on those university groups and organized groups that would want to come and learn about the people, about the biodiversity of Mesoamerica, and even some people too that were interested in learning about the socio-economic state of the country as well, you know. So that's where we present in our program is really what or the situation that the Mesoamerica is facing today, environmentally and culturally, and its agriculture. So by doing this, like I said, we not only bring income, but also I think one of the most important things that we have seen in this tourist program is that people feel very proud of their culture and of their foods. They feel proud that outsiders wanna come and learn about their ways. So I think that's like more than the economic benefits. The biggest benefit that we've seen is that people feel very good about themselves, very proud about themselves, and starting to pay more attention to their native foods. And that's kind of our main goal, was that is to rescue our traditional foods and our superfoods. And one way of doing that, it was by also having the outsiders come and be part of that as well, you know. And so that's what we've seen the biggest benefit that this tourism program has brought to us, is that it has been a positive influence, encouragement to the communities to do what they're already doing, you know, instead of creating or doing something different from their daily lives, you know. So we don't want to be as the other tourism that presents something that is not real. Like you go to these places in our area where you can find, you know, Italian restaurants, French restaurants, all these restaurants, but you can't find restaurant that offers native foods, you know. So we're one of the few people that provide that give the opportunities to outside to really taste some of our cuisine, you know, and some that are home cuisine that you cannot find it in any outside of the homes, you know. So that's a little bit of the work of that what we have done with the Mesoamerican Permaculture Institute. And probably will be Lisa will be sharing with you our webpages and addresses for whoever is interested in our work. So yeah, and for any questions, we will be here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rony. You know, we were talking before the presentation about all of the wonderful questions, and I'm going to use this as an opportunity to talk about the questions that were brought up during registration that we're also starting to see in the Q&A chat. And I think Stephen has said he wants to answer one of those questions. Yep. And it has to do with, after buy-in from the community to work on this project, how did you start marketing the tourist activities? Was the focus on domestic tourism or directly to international, and why? And on that note, Stephen, I'll let you take it from there.
Okay, thank you very much. One of the advantages of our project was that I was simultaneously working as a consultant through the Biodiversity International project that funded the first 2 years of our work. But I was also the co-owner of a tourism company. And so we were able to start bringing our clients to the community very early on, which produced income and which was very important motivation for all of us. And of course, at that time, all of that income was coming from international tourists who were visiting the community. And so, and that has continued to grow until the pandemic, reaching sometimes several hundred, 300 or 400 international tourists a year to the community. But at the same time, what happened is that national tourism started to develop and visit the area as well, as the community became more visible on social media, and we brought local journalists and student groups. The visibility of the community started to reach local media, and that started generating a flow of national tourists. And this is definitely my perspective here, although I can attest that I've heard this from many community members as well. The national tourists are a mixed bag for the community. First of all, they're not going to pay for any of the services that international tourists would pay for. So they don't, and this isn't because they're bad people, it's because they don't need help. They just drive to the community, get out of their car, and have a picnic on the beach, so to speak. So there isn't really an opportunity, there hasn't been an opportunity there yet. And secondly, tourism, while it is the fourth most important economic activity in Bolivia, or it was in 2019, it's really not something that has been integrated into the culture and into the politics of the country like you might find in Costa Rica, for example. And so education about what tourism is and learning how to be a tourist, let's say, is not a part of sort of cultural context here. Again, not to say that people don't value their country and love to travel and visit and see the unique places. It's just a different approach, especially in areas like waste management, which can become a serious problem in small communities that don't have a way to manage their waste. So yes, at the beginning, and until the pandemic, international tourism was the optimal way for us to work on the income generation piece of the project, as well as the conservation of the agro-biodiversity. But the national tourism brings other outcomes. Some of them I would consider negative, but what I really would like to say here is that in a way, it has caused this sort of re-sacredization of this community to the point where people feel immense pride, as Rony mentioned, in their place. And that brings a kind of protection to it that I hope will counter, because national tourism is now the only tourism in Santiago de Okola. And just last week, community members contacted me asking for help with how can they manage, because it's something new. Big buses show up, they'll park on a field that's usually used for growing food, and leave garbage, so forth. So they now need help in working with this increase in national, local tourists. And so that's really what we're shifting into now, because we can't anticipate international tourists returning. And in fact, we really wouldn't want them right now, because there's so many old people in the community that we feel that it would be too risky to introduce a lot of people from elsewhere at this time. And so now we're actually writing a grant that we can use to fund like tourist patrol, that would be available to, approach local tourists and talk about the area and request that people bring their waste with them when they leave. So we're doing this sort of pivot and also looking at charging an entrance fee into the community, which many places do already, and using that to finance over time the patrols, and perhaps generate income for participants as well, now that that's dried up. And if you Google Santiago, last thing I'll say, if you Google Santiago de Okola, you'll just find this wealth of cultural references there that didn't exist 15 years ago. Parades, wanting to go dance at the feet of the sleeping dragon and things like this. Like really, the Facebook page that we have, all the followers are local. Their last names are last names of the people from the community. So, there's been this parallel development that we didn't anticipate, but that does get to this part of the domestic tourism and what it can mean actually going there, but what it also can mean in just people's awareness of this special place.
Thank you, Stephen. And one of the themes that emerged in the registration questions, and I'm seeing it in the Q&A chat box, and Sherry, I'm going to turn to you because we chatted a little bit about it, and I think it's some critical information for folks, but how do non-tribal, non-indigenous people get started with agritourism? And as part of that question, how have you seen tribal members and indigenous communities get involved in agritourism?
Well, based on some of the case studies that are included in the manual that I mentioned, and other listings that we have on nativeamerica.travel, many of the indigenous people have started out organically, by people in the community being curious about the production of food, how it's harvested, and so those local people, the indigenous people, inviting locals over to learn more. So beginning more organically, like that, and then for others, it's as Rony was talking about, and Stephen, that the indigenous people are feeling the need, because I guess they're feeling that they've moved away from their traditions in farming and ranching, and now are seeing the need, especially during COVID-19, to protect their foods, to be able to have their own food, and to share that food with their tribal members.
Thank you. And Rony, I've got a question for you because we're running short on time. I want to make sure to get everybody, but one of the recurring themes is how did you get your food bank or your seed bank started, and how do you do outreach?
Mm-hmm. Okay, so probably the hardest thing that we encounter first is what food to prioritize. Because we mentioned that there is Mesoamerica is one of the most biodiverse places on Earth. So we have extensive amounts of food. So that was the first difficulty, was that, and then trying to get also the other thing is how to grow all of that diversity in one place, which is not possible, because of this is seeds have also very special conditions, to grow. So those were the first obstacles that we had. Is that what to grow, and then we came to the conclusion, like I mentioned before, is to prioritize the foods that are high nutrition content. So that's how we came to prioritize this, and decided not to do everything. So in our seed banks, we have a collection of 251 foods, different foods, but we only trade 21 of them. And that includes selling, exchanging, and giving credit and seed to people. So we have a network of about 100 farmers that they grow our seeds. So basically the Mesoamerican Permaculture Institute, what it does is channels all that material and information and tries to share it as well. So that's a little bit of the, like I said, ideal will be that we have a network of seed banks in different bioregions. So that way we can really have more biodiversity. So one seed community bank cannot have all the diversity that is needed to be protected. So we have to have a network of them. So one way that we will convince farmers to start saving their seeds, unfortunately, was to give economic value to it. So once we started to sell seeds, then farmers started to pay more attention to it. But still the most seeds are in demand, still the non-native foods, unfortunately. What I call it, the market crops are the ones who are still in more demand. And unfortunately, a lot of these market crops are not native foods.
Exactly.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And since we still have some time, I was going through the Q&A, and one of the other recurring questions, I know Stephen touched on it a little bit, but I'd like to get Sherry's input and Rony's input on the impact of COVID on tourism and how communities are dealing with that.
So for the tribes here in the United States, it's the impact of COVID has been devastating. Many of the tribes have closed off their borders to non-natives. Even tribal members that live off reservation aren't allowed onto the reservation. They've closed down their businesses. But the kind of the amazing thing that we've seen is that they've repurposed some of their businesses. For example, a kitchen in the casino is now cooking meals for their elders in the community. And so we're seeing a lot of that. But this virus is very scary. And because many of our tribes are located in rural areas, you might have seen on the news, the Navajo Nation has been dramatically impacted by the virus. So, yeah, I mean, it's hard to put words to how devastating it's been to our tribes.
Agreed. I was talking to our tribal liaison recently about the impact to our Washington tribes, and a lot of folks aren't talking about that. So thank you for sharing that perspective. Rony, would you like to care to share your perspective on the impact of COVID on tourism and how you all are dealing with that?
Yes, just like Sherry said, it's been devastating, especially for indigenous people, which usually are the marginalized communities. So it's been even harder for for them. And not only because of the infrastructure too, but in the marginalization, but also the strict governmental measurements that have been taken in without the support. So there has been like very strict measurement, governmental measurements, but without no support, you know. So like there was not allowing the farmers to be bringing their food to the markets, you know, but it was allowed for commercial processed foods to come in, you know. So things like that. So like many farmers were giving their food away because they can access to the markets, you know. And the positive side of it is that now, like Sher was saying too, now kind of our association kind of changes a little bit, or the focus of its work has changed. And before it was education and tourism, and now is more in processing food. So now our amaranth food products that we made has a huge demand, so that we cannot keep up with. So basically all our produce for 2021 is already been sold, you know. So that's a positive outcome, because also that food is being shared locally and is not leaving the country. That's not what we wanted to do, is export our foods, but food to be available locally. So in that positive, that's the positive outcome of this COVID, is that now has changed our focus of our work.
Thank you. We're coming up on the top of the hour, and at this point, I'd like to turn it back over to Lisa to close us out. There's a ton of questions in the Q&A, and I'll let her round us out and talk about how we'll get those answered.
Okay. Thank you so much, Trevor, Stephen, Sherry, and Rony. That was so grateful hearing your experiences and sharing what's going on in your communities. As Trevor mentioned, there are a whole bunch of questions we didn't get to. All the team here, the panelists and I will sort through and see what we can answer directly to folks. And also we want to look generally for ways to keep these conversations and exchanges going. So if you put a specific question in, we'll do our best to get back to you. And, you know, especially if you're okay with it, we've got your email addresses and registration, and we can get back to you directly. Or you can always feel free to reach out to me or the other folks on the panel through email or whatever contact information. Facebook, Stephen shared his Facebook link. So I'll circle back with the panelists and see how they feel about sharing various forms of direct contact, and we'll include that in a follow-up email to you. I just want to take one more moment to really thank everyone who was part of this effort, and mention that we do want to keep these conversations going, and we've got a series coming up. Let's see if I can, coming up next in December, on December 9th, we're going to be switching gears and talking about virtual farm and food experiences. And then already planning ahead for January 13th, we're going to be talking about farm-based education. And we've got stories from the US and other countries as well. So, we're Catherine Melanzi, who has been doing a tremendous job putting together these panels, has already started to line up speakers for February, March, April, and May on a variety of different topics, ranging from regional strategies to deal with COVID impacts, culinary tourism, and social justice issues. So We'll stay in touch by email and continue to work with all of you to strengthen the network and share information. And keep in mind that recordings, resources, and registration for these upcoming sessions will be posted on the website, agritourismworkshop.com. So thank you all so much for joining us today, and hope to see you again next month.